So what happens when you take a story that's passed between at least 3 different writers, 5 directors? You have the mess that's known as Casino Royale, the 1967 version that we'll be talking about today. I'm John Chang.
I'm Dan Evans. Hi.
And we will certainly cover, in depth Casino Royale itself, the 1967 version. The bottom line to me, though, is also there's something about Bond that it seems to just really carry on through the years. And I just wondered about your thoughts about what is it that makes Bond so universally appealing. What makes it that it's such an easy watch, I guess.
Well, I guess when I grew up with Bond, it was in the 80s mostly is when I was watching him. So it was this combination of, stunts, intrigue, this sort of superhero man's man, beautiful women and kind of exotic locations and a bit of humor as well. So that was kind of what I've always associated with James Bond. And I don't think that's really what the books were originally about, but they were to some degree, but not to the extent that it kind of blossomed into over the years.
Right.
And I think actually, going on what you were saying, I think there are actually 10 writers for the original 67 Casino Royale.
Wow.
I read, so yeah.
Yeah, I know there was a bunch of them and stuff, and it's just kind of, and I don't want to get too much to right now or something like that, but it just suddenly you get the sense of that there's no coherency as to what it was that it's like where if you had 10 cooks, right, and all kind of getting the input as to what the dish should taste like and stuff. It's that kind of sense, I think, in the end.
It does have that, but I kind of think as well, definitely it is not a terribly coherent movie, but I would say in some respects that's what ties both of the movies together from the 2006, because actually when you look at it objectively, the new one doesn't make any sense at all either. When you look, it's the first 2 hours make sense, but after that it's just a mess completely. You can also, there's also this sort of question of what sort of level of coherency do we allow or give the benefit of the doubt to for different genres. David Lynch makes fairly incoherent movies, but because they're kind of slightly serious mystery thrillers and they're surreal, he's given this leeway, whereas you could argue that the 1967 one, if you look at it more as a sort of a parody and a very kind of the time zeitgeisty kind of movie, it's cleverer than I think people give it credit for as a movie.
I think they were trying to do something, like you said, like a parody and stuff like that. And yet, and you and I have talked about it offline, that it's like if we had a sense of kind of what it could have been, Austin Powers definitely would be kind of what, where they could have taken it. But instead, there's this kind of bizarre mix of kind of where on the one hand, they were trying to do something with, something pretty abstract in a way, with a lot of different elements and stuff. And at the same time, they were trying to have something that kind of had a plot to it, of a real plot, kind of as much as Austin Powers is a parody and it spoofs things and stuff. There's at least some semblance of a plot, so to me, I think that's one of the things to me that to make an effective parody you have to have is some kind of grounding in reality, some sense of there's some connection to reality and stuff like that. And I felt like the 67 version has very little, if any, ties to that.
Yeah, they throw a lot of things in there that, the interesting thing for me is this idea of the multiple James Bonds, because that it seems like a really kind of random, annoying, actually, kind of comedy parody thing. But you have to remember when that was made, there had only actually been one James Bond. Because that's weird for me, in that you associate James Bond with there being 20, 10 different guys who played him over the years.
Right.
And that you always got this thing of you're comparing it to the original Bond, and they're never quite as good as the original. And that's exactly what this story is about, really. And the fact that it kind of starts off in quite a contained story and then balloons into this ridiculous kind of farce where you've got, you know, Native American Indians jumping out of a plane and like animals just randomly popping up. And it was, and in a way, it's kind of like, it is that sort of what happened to the James Bond franchise. It turned from something small and contained, like you look at the early ones like Dr. No and From Russia with Love, and you know, they're kind of quite simple spy stories. And then a few movies later, you've got bases in volcanoes, you know, satellites that are powered by diamonds shooting lasers at people, and women painted gold and stuff. So it in a way, it actually does, it's quite kind of prescient of what actually happened to Bond as a franchise. And I think that's what it's kind of making fun in a way of the phenomena of Bond and what it's like to pretend to be Bond. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you know, truth to that, where it does kind of take things to a bit of an extreme, you know, like you said, with the multiple Bonds and stuff like that. But it's interesting, though, like you said also, that, like, you know, at that point, there was still only one Bond, right? I mean, they, you know, I mean, the other Bond at that around that time frame was, what's it called? George Lazenby. And he wasn't until 69, so he wasn't even until after this movie, you know, was made stuff. So like you said, it's for what reason they either, you know, saw it coming, or that, you know, somehow the idea came up and stuff like that. So it is kind of weird that, you know, I don't know, maybe in a way, you know, this movie was ahead of its time and stuff. I mean,
I think so, yeah. In a very, very odd sort of meta way, I think it is. And it's, sorry, go on, yeah.
No, I was going to say that's one of the things that is funny, though, about how we have come to accept, though, that, you know, Bond has, you know, it's coming up as nearly as many iterations as Doctor Who, you know, like kind of, you know, without the this kind of power to be reincarnated and stuff.
And I think what's really strange for me is that the 1967, well, the Casino Royale 67 has a lot of kind of offhand political commentary thrown in. Like you have all the leaders of the Western world, and they're very kind of stereotypical in the, you know, all their corruption. And there's a bit where they're blackmail, you know, they've got the auction for the blackmail pictures for all the corrupt leaders. And you've got this weird sort of, it's kind of like a cabinet of Dr. Caligari set for the German spy training center. Which is, you know, I think they're sort of, the interesting thing about that is they're saying they're training spies for both sides of this sort of Cold War.
Right.
And so you think, you know, Germany at that time was both East and West. You know, they're kind of, you wonder if they're, maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but kind of saying, you know, Germany's kind of sat in the middle of these things, and they don't really know kind of where they sit in the world. Perhaps so, but yeah. So they have this sort of political commentary, and before that, I would say in Bond movies up to that point, which would be You Only Live Twice, there isn't really. I don't think there's much political commentary. It's mostly Bond versus Blofeld, and then after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you get into Diamonds Are Forever, and that one is very interesting because it has the fake moon landing scene in it. Where Bond bursts into this kind of set in Las Vegas, I think it is, and there's people shooting like the moon landing. And so it's kind of where they start to kind of throw in sort of bits of political kind of commentary in the main series. And in fact, Diamonds Are Forever takes a lot of the farcical nature of Casino Royale and incorporates it. Because you've got these two incredibly camp series. You've got the two kind of, I don't know if they're lesbians or what, but the two girls who hang out with Willard White, who are his female bodyguards. And yeah, there's quite a lot of ridiculous stuff in Diamonds Are Forever, but you know, it's almost like they've started to borrow from the parody.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they took a lot from, like, kind of like you said, where they took the classic Bond elements, you know, some degree, and then they, you know, did kind of just this kind of goulash of stuff, you know, to it. I felt like, you know, to me, what makes Austin Powers much stronger is the fact that, like, Mike Myers is clearly, you know, like kind of a fan of the, you know, James Bond series, and he does it with a respect that's not like kind of like he's not like kind of bowing down to it and stuff like that. He's doing it to where, and he's poking fun at it that like that we as fans kind of appreciate. I feel like that's the thing that like kind of that he manages to do, where like we get the joke, like and it's not like it's not like kind of that you have to be on the inside and stuff like that, but or at least it feels like you're kind of sitting next to a fan and stuff like that, and he's kind of making this joke and like, or he's telling a joke about the Bond series and stuff, and you're kind of getting it because like you're both fans. Like that's how it feels to me anyway with the Austin Powers series.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean the sort of the referencing of the Bond series is so great in Austin Powers. The fact that Dr. Evil suddenly has a son and has to deal with a son in the 90s and things like this, and
Mr. Bigglesworth the cat.
Yeah, Mr. Bigglesworth, and just the whole difference of culture between the 60s and the 90s is just. I mean, I actually watched Casino Royale and then I immediately watched Austin Powers because I was really interested to see. And you can tell Mike Myers is a massive fan of Peter Sellers, and I think the whole sort of like English comedy from that era is obviously really heavily influenced by it.
I mean, that's the thing that I feel like was a lost opportunity, though, with this original, was you had such talent. You had Peter Sellers, you had Woody Allen, on and on, David Niven and stuff like that. I mean, these are like really, like for cast wise, I can't even imagine like kind of how they got all these people together, something like that. But then in the end, you didn't leverage any of the talents. I mean, that's what it felt like, though.
No, I mean, it was. I did some sort of reading on how that whole production went, and Charles Feldman was basically trying to fool people into getting on board the movie and was saying, okay, if I get Peter Sellers involved, then I can get Ursula Andress, and then she can get like David Niven, and it was. They had apparently Woody Allen wrote a load of material for that movie, and it all got cut out because Feldman.
That's what it seems like.
He was concentrating on doing the story progression, but he cut out like loads of. Like, why would you cut out like Woody Allen's script from that movie? And likewise, Peter Sellers played it so straight.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's somebody who like just was. You kind of it's the other one that kind of just reminds me of is like where with the Karate Kid with Jackie Chan, where have this guy who like is a massive talent, acting, comedy, karate, something like that, and you don't use any of that. Like I mean, okay, granted he's gonna have screen draw and just like these other talents, stuff like that, but it's like to do that is like having like kind of, I don't know, like you've got a Ferrari, but you're gonna like have it sit in the kitchen or sit in the garage rather. Like kind of like the first Bueller's thing, right? Where what was that line? The guy like kind of clear, like talked about his dad, that he clearly has like his priorities screwed up or something like that, and it just that kind of that's what it seems like, kind of where you have all this talent and you're just why kind of why don't you use it?
Yeah, it's one of those things you just think, what is going on in this movie? Because I mean, in the bits that Woody Allen is in, and he obviously wrote those lines for himself. You can tell because of the delivery. Right. I mean, he's very funny in those bits, and there's kind of, I mean, even Peter Sellers' performance is so kind of patchy. There's like apparently he was really intimidated by Orson Welles, and they have because that's what the whole movie is supposed to sort of revolve around. And Orson Welles just didn't have any time for him at all, and his performance is weird. You have him doing magic tricks, but yet he's still very serious.
Right.
And it's like you almost kind of think, well, he should have just been like the serious LeChiffre,
right? And that would have been funny in itself to kind of play off of that, because different times when you have a comic actor and you have the straight man, stuff like that, the whole Abbott Costello kind of thing, it works if there's like kind of tension, if there's conflict or something interesting. But instead, you have him doing magic tricks. It's like, what is that about?
It was ridiculous. And apparently they didn't even shoot that scene together because Peter Sellers wouldn't be in the same shots with him, or they had to shoot it separately. That's why that scene has this weird kind of no energy at all.
Right.
And Peter Sellers plays it so straight, like it's kind of, you wonder if there's like this piece of his personality that says, if I play this really straight, I can get like some leading man roles in Hollywood. but it just doesn't. It's just one of those, again, it's the wasted opportunity.
Yeah.
Except for two very odd, like horrifically kind of racial stereotype impressions just randomly thrown in with his dialogue with Wells, which was really strange.
Right.
After we'd been playing it straight, the whole kind of movie, very odd.
I mean, I think the other thing that kind of, along with that is simply, you had this thing where this movie or Casino Royale and stuff like that, it was a story that is one of the ones that like kind of is based on the original novels and stuff like that. I think like where they started kind of, like you said, with the franchise as a whole, they started kind of straying from the novels and stuff like that. And then, so in essence, in a way, like it seemed like that they were somewhat trying to reboot things at that point and stuff, but instead they just kind of went 180 or 360 or 540 away from kind of the source material and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way there's sort of David Niven is supposed to sort of represent the true Bond in that he's kind of like this kind of English gentleman, and he's kind of quite chivalrous, whereas a lot of the other people are kind of fairly sort of lascivious, and they're all these women are trying to seduce him and everything else, and he kind of, I feel like in a way they're being quite cynical about their times, in that there's all the sort of the free love era, and he's kind of representing the old world chivalry, but there's this kind of, if you notice, a lot of these sort of the female spies are all kind of being controlled by Jimmy Bond or by kind of like the system, whereas he's sort of outside of it. They have to pull him out of retirement to kind of deal with this. So
yeah, that's an interesting point though, where on the one hand, Bond, before the whole free love thing and stuff like that, kind of, he embodied that idea already and everything. And then meanwhile, it's almost like where the world around him was changing to where it's almost like where, like kind of, okay, if you were like maybe like a rebel in a way, right, of kind of having this ideal and stuff like that, but then everybody else is kind of now like kind of taking that on, the way to be a rebel would be to kind of be more conservative and to be more straight and stuff like that. I feel like that's kind of maybe like, I don't know, in a way like kind of where maybe they were going with that, or kind of the contrast and stuff like that. And I think that gets into like one of those kind of key ideas of what Bond stands for, right? Where he symbolizes like kind of the masculinity, the kind of idea, the classic Bond anyway, of what, like what it means to be a man's man and stuff like that. And it seemed like we're over the years we kind of seen different versions of it, like where you start off with kind of the Sean Connery version, and then you kind of start going to like kind of the Roger Moore ideal and stuff like that, and that's kind of where it kind of becomes a little bit more comical in a way, like again, and like I don't know, like I guess that's the thing, like it seems like there's this kind of back and forth of like kind of trying to do things that like to one extent of like kind of playing Bond serious, then the kind of more comical, and then it kind of swings back and forth and everything, and then so now we kind of get to 2006 and Daniel Craig and stuff like that, and I think that's kind of where he comes in, that like I offline we kind of like I shared the one quote that he kind of felt like Mike Myers actually like screwed kind of the whole franchise and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, that they couldn't do the gags anymore because he'd done them all in Austin Powers.
Right. So it's kind of like that when it becomes so obvious a parody and stuff like that, then that kind of, I guess in a way, tells you that like you're becoming a cliche. And so I think that's kind of where they felt the pressure to kind of like bring a freshness to it. And I felt like all things aside, I feel like that's one thing they did achieve, where they kind of like went back to the roots. They kind of went back to what the Sean Connery idea of a Bond stands for in terms of being a this kind of rugged individual and stuff like that. But then also at the same time, there's this kind of, to me, one thing that I feel like kind of the other Bonds kind of lacked, that Daniel Craig achieved, was kind of having like this little bit of an emotional heart, where the typical Bonds kind of, the whole idea of a Bond girl, right, is like this girl who falls in love with him, they sleep together, and then like, they either get killed or he kind of, carries on and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of the thing that, where other than on Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby, you really don't see like kind of this, Bond being more vulnerable, being more, like kind of, caring about somebody and stuff. And then meanwhile, I think we have this Bond's curse where like, when he does kind of fall in love, then of course the girl gets killed and stuff.
Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, the girls get killed regardless whether
right
or not. It seems,
Right.
I mean, yeah, but it's funny, that people sort of claim like the Casino Royale of 2006 was a massive sort of reboot, and they made him gritty, but they actually kind of do that every time.
Right.
And actually, what you notice is that when they change the Bond, they put a huge amount of effort in trying to make it really realistic, or more realistic than the ones that have gone before. They did the same with Timothy Dalton with Living Daylights and License to Kill. They were actually pretty much on the same vein as On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Casino Royale. And even like the first Pierce Brosnan one, GoldenEye, it was a bit over the top, but it wasn't too, I mean, by the time you get to the next one, it's completely, you got stealth boats and God knows what else going on. But it always seems like they start off trying to be serious, and then it just kind of, like Casino Royale kind of, balloons into something ridiculous. And I would say the same has happened with Daniel Craig. You've started off with Mads Mikkelsen doing a really kind of good sort of gritty, authentic bad guy, and I thought his performance in that is great. Yeah. But then you get to Skyfall, and God, I can't remember his name now. The Spanish actor Javier Bardem.
Oh, right.
And he's got the blonde hair. He's kind of super camp. He's got the weird jaw that kind of comes out and goes back in. I mean, it's just like an Austin Powers parody by that point, and that you're only 2 movies away from this supposedly super gritty Bond. And Spectre was pretty bad. Christoph Waltz was just like, eating his way through the scenery and that as well. So, I mean, in a way, I think it's almost like the curse of Casino Royale 67. Things always tend to sort of balloon out of control with Bond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that like, where you maybe start off with a vision of things and stuff, and then somewhere along the ways it seems like you kind of start straying off course, like kind of, and I think that's like whether it's this franchise or like kind of a franchise we won't mention at this point and stuff like that, but it just seems like at different times like the directors or the original filmmakers kind of true vision of things can kind of have one direction. And then, I don't know, unless like somehow there's this kind of ability to kind of keep it that way or keep it together, then things can kind of really get, off track really quickly and stuff. I think that's like kind of just something that like, we see it like kind of with the comic superheroes. We see it with like kind of, just, in fact, one that another kind of trilogy, if you will, I recently watched was with M. Night Shaylaman and stuff. And so this one was his hero version was with like Bruce Willis in Unbreakable, and then Split with James McAvoy and stuff. And it seemed like with the second installment, the things were really, it was really strong and stuff like that. But then for some reason in that third version with Glass, I don't know, it seemed kind of go a little bit astray again and stuff.
I think he just rushed. I mean, I think with Split, it was interesting. I mean, he's always good at twists. I think he just kind of decided, okay, let's tie this into that universe. That's going to be interesting. Or maybe he set out to be, but I think he just rushed Glass out of the door too quickly. He should have spent more time thinking about that, doing something clever. But I mean, I'm really, my theory with Bond is that you need a Bond. The guy who plays him needs to be bigger than the role of Bond in order to be good. Like, because I think Sean Connery was he was Mr. Universe at the time. He'd been in a few other bits, but he was kind of, in a way, I think he was kind of like, because he was the first one as well, he kind of masters that role pretty much. And even Roger Moore, he just came in as Roger Moore. And so it's kind of like, I don't even need to try and be like Sean Connery because I'm Roger Moore. So it's kind of, and that was the problem with Timothy Dalton, was that he was too much of a serious actor, too much of a good actor, because he played it far too seriously, and he didn't kind of make it his own. And I actually think in a way Daniel Craig has sort of made it his own, but it's just not the way that I particularly like. I'm just not a big fan of Daniel Craig.
So how so?
Oh no, I mean, I think as an actor he's good, but I just don't like him as Bond. So I told you this before. I mean, he seems to be just kind of strutting and pouting his way through Casino Royale, and looking very serious like this and driving like this and stuff, and it just lacks this kind of natural kind of feeling that, you know, Sean Connery kind of just like effortlessly did. Yeah, and I just don't think, for me, I kind of like Bond to be a little bit kind of witty. And Daniel Craig's Bond just isn't witty. He's got the emotional heart, but I mean, there's a reason why George Lazenby only had one Bond movie. It's because he was crying at the end, and everybody at the time was like, "Yeah, we don't really need to see this. Let's just go back to the funny one-liners and the action sequences. Thanks very much." So I'm kind of more in that camp, really. But.
And actually, that's funny because that's what I've always thought too. Like, but that's actually a misconception. It was actually where they basically just couldn't get him back to playing Bond and stuff like that. So,
let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It seemed like, and that's belief is like, you know, where, you know, like kind of never mind like being like a one-termer president, right, and stuff, but, you know, it seemed like he was a one-termer Bond. And so on the surface, it seems like, you know, he didn't have what it took to kind of, you know, play Bond again or everything. But they kind of got into this weird kind of contract negotiation and stuff like that. And then he started like kind of doing really bizarre things where like he would just grow out his hair and, you know, like just not show up in the press junket as they want him to look, right? You know, like kind of having the Bond image and stuff. So so this was part of the whole 60s thing, and, you know, like again, the free love, like you said, and everything like that. And he, you know, like kind of was more into that. And so he was not into like kind of playing the straight lace, you know, like kind of, you know, the image that they wanted him to have for, you know, showing up at these press junkets and stuff like that of being Bond. So they said, you know, hey, you know, we don't need this. You were out, and he was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like kind of at that time, and so that's kind of like a weird kind of thing that kind of happened with them and stuff like that. So, but but I can see though, like, you know, at the same time, you know, all of that aside, I think your reaction is probably pretty much also what, you know, most people have with Bond is that like, oh, we don't need to see him having like kind of, you know, this other, you know, like kind of, you know, more sensitive side, whatever. We want this Bond who's like kind of, you know, the, you know, man's man and kind of jumps through these hoops, goes through these explosions, and then asks for his vodka martini after all that and stuff. And which
I think there's a balance. You know, you can get it. You know, all the Sean Connery ones have that fine balance of like action that's actually worth watching, and kind of like, you know, the odd witty deadpan one-liner that goes down really well. And I mean, I don't know, just for me,
but that's probably why they had Roger Moore though. You know, next, you know, up was like kind of, you know, they wanted somebody who like was witty and kind of, you know, can basically, you know, have all these crazy things, shootings and all that kind of explosions happen. And meanwhile, his hair is not, you know, is not one hair is out of place and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's just him on a green screen, sort of like, you know, dodging on skis and things like this. I mean, they're very silly, the Roger Moore ones, but they're also very entertaining. You know, there's some really fantastic stunt sequences. You know, there's some great funny one-liners from Roger Moore.
Oh yeah,
it's like it's pretty good stuff.
That was actually my entry point into it. Was like the first one I think I saw in the theater was Moonraker, and so that's so that was like kind of, you know, like the whole bigger, you know, badder Bond and stuff like that. That was like that was it.
Yeah. That's so over the top, Moonraker. But yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, my first one was For Your Eyes Only.
Oh wow.
Which is actually kind of the slightly more serious-ish ones of the Roger Moore.
True.
Stuff. But God, I must have been like 6 when my mum told me to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my mum had a very interesting interpretation of what was suitable for children to watch. But yeah, so that was, I mean, I was just blown away. Like a lotus that could go underwater, that just blew my mind at 6 years old. But yeah, I mean, I think with the Daniel Craig, the problem is with Bond is there's so many kind of traditions that have been instilled in it. It's like, one, you need a really good song. The opening sequence has to be like some elaborate kind of stunt sequence that goes on for like 10, 15 minutes. So Casino Royale does hit those notes. And I would say actually up to the 2-hour mark, when it's kind of the happy ending, actually everything is kind of coherent. But then it just goes just totally random. And it doesn't make any sense. Like Vespa, why does she want to kill herself? There's just no motivation for that. You know, she could have just told them that her boyfriend was being held hostage, and she had sex with Bond quite a few times by that point. I don't know how much feelings for that boyfriend she really still had. So it just, and it's supposed to be like this cliffhanger, and it doesn't get resolved in the next one at all. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And for me, there's just like a few really egregious kind of errors. I would say one is like the train sequence with Evelyn and Vespa is just so painfully bad. I was just cringing the whole way through that scene. It was just felt like there was no chemistry. The dialogue was pretty bad in terms of sort of flirting, and it was just painful to watch. I actually made myself watch it again because I thought, no, it can't be that bad, and it was. And of course, as being a watch fanatic as well, and you know, for me, James Bond is and always will be, should have a Rolex Submariner. That's his watch. And I mean, even in Casino Royale, he still has a Rolex. But you know, they give him a Mega Seamaster, and it's horrific kind of like brand placement, because she goes Rolex, and he goes, it's an Omega actually, and she goes, beautiful. And I'm just like, oh, you know, it's so annoying. It's almost like when in the Pierce Brosnan ones, they replaced the Aston Martin with a BMW. It's just, come on.
Yeah, I mean, that is funny how, like, you know, these different brands though definitely have no problem jumping on the Bond wagon, I guess, and stuff. They really see the opportunity to kind of, you know, get themselves in this kind of, you know, light and stuff. And at the same time though, like you said, it is like so painfully obvious different times that, like, if you're an actual person who is in their target market stuff, I just don't see that kind of like sells you then. Like, kind of, that's what's interesting. I think it certainly gets you in the spotlight, right? Your brand and your product and everything. But I just don't see myself like running out, you know, like kind of to get you know, this BMW because like Bond drove it. Although I have to admit that I did go out with a gal, and we, you know, that's probably one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why we're no longer going out, that she did get that exact, you know, models like that. So that, yeah.
You'd be surprised. Like, a lot of people kind of want that kind of Bond mystique, and we're going by an Omega Seamaster to do so. But you know, that's also why the original 60s Rolex Submariner is like, you know, 100 or 200 grand or something crazy right now. So yeah, market for that's insane. But yeah. I mean, it's a pretty good movie though. I won't want to bash it completely. It's a pretty entertaining movie. I think the you know, the classic Bond stunt sequence at the beginning works really well. It's very parkour based. It doesn't always make sense. I don't know why he got in the bulldozer, but you know.
But I think that hits the nail on the head as to what it is. I kind of, you know, all things aside, we can kind of talk about a lot of the more emotional or kind of deeper things and stuff. But let's face it, Bond is like kind of summer, you know, movie fare that, like, you know, something, you know, light and that has whiz bang that we watch. We want the depth to a degree to kind of where it kind of draws us in a little bit more. But ultimately, like, you know, you and I have talked about it, that like we love watching Bond around the holidays because it's something that like you can have playing in the background and it's entertaining to watch. I mean, that's really what, you know, like at the very at the bottom line, I guess it's like that's, you know, what 007 represents, is like kind of, you know, this light fare that, like, you know, we, you know, yeah, we want him to kind of, you know, maybe have some kind of more complex issues, or, you know, like kind of be more serious and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, we just want to have fun watching him.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a bit like what I call the idea of the horror movie contract, in that you want to be scared, but you don't want it just to be 2 hours of torture. And likewise, you kind of don't want it to be too boring either. And like with Bond, the contract is, I want to see some good stunts and some cool people and some good music, and like there needs to be a bit of danger, and that'll be about it, you know. Then I'm done. So, and yeah, I
mean, for probably just about each movie, you know, Bond movie, I'd have to really think hard as to what the actual plot is about. You know, kind of, you know, I mean, to think through like kind of the storyline from beginning to end as to what, like, you know, yeah, I mean, know like kind of generally what each one is about and stuff. You know, Casino Royale, of course, you know, there's a, you know, high stakes game that like he, you know, all the money is kind of on the line, stuff like that. But then in terms of like, you know, why did he get there, or what, you know, kind of is really at stake, I'd have to think about like what it was that kind of really, you know, like kind of got him there, and what really like kind of ultimately is achieved by him winning and stuff like that.
Well, the thing was, you see, I watched this because I remember watching it at the cinema and thinking that didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So I was really paying attention very closely this time. And so he goes to track down the guy in wherever it is, and there's the right. And he knows he's got something that's interesting, and it turns out to be a phone, and he has a text message.
Right.
So he goes through all of that to get a text message with one word. And he traces the location to the Bahamas.
Right.
So somehow he can do that from one text message. You know, MI6 is fantastic technology they have.
Yep.
And so from there, he somehow finds out about the contact who's there's the bomb for the Skyfleet thing. They're going to blow up and short the stock so that they can have this massive gambling tournament. So there we go. That's it. You've got to trace the text message to get the guy who's going to blow up the planes, so that they can short the stock, so they can have a big sort of gambling tournament. Well, they couldn't have just had the gambling tournament in the first place. I don't know, but that's how we got there. But I thought that sequence with the game was very good, actually. And I mean, you kind of had Mathis and Vespa as like, for people who had no idea what the game's about, and they're going, "Oh, that's a tell." So it's sort of, you know, it's just helping people along, which I didn't have too much fun with. But I
mean, I think that's one thing that I gotta give them credit for, is that like, unlike some of the, you know, other Bonds and stuff like that, or actually a lot of spy movies where there's so much exposition, where people are explaining things to you, and where you almost have to, because, you know, sometimes the stuff gets so complex that you kind of like wonder what the heck's going on, except for the fact that like the people are, you know, doing like these obvious lines and stuff. I think this version of Bond, like, you know, Casino Royale, did a good job of like kind of where it's, you know, showing you things and kind of the things are happening, and it kind of like relies on your intelligence kind of pick up on, you know, like kind of what's going on and stuff. So I give them that credit and everything.
Yeah. I think they did a pretty good job with that. I mean, although I will say, and my friend will be angry if I don't mention this, that basically they stole the whole, you know, having to defibrillate the guy, you know, in between bouts of cards from Impossible 3, this idea that you have to somehow...
I forgot about that.
Life, like at a moment of high sort of tension in the movie.
Right.
But, yeah. It's... I thought that it was they did it well, actually.
And the other thing that, like, you know, where I think they intentionally got away from the classic, you know, Bond villain explaining to him what he's about to do to him and stuff like that. You know, like kind of, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." Like kind of thing. You know, like where that's been parodied and everything. So I think they, you know, it's clear that they just ran away from that. Like kind of instead, you know, like kind of did a more serious,
They still had it. It's, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to lose your balls." because he had the knot with the rope, right? And so it was kind of like, I expect you to not be a man at the end of this. I will say, I mean, considering the amount of pain he was supposed to be in, he seemed to recover rather quickly. It seemed like only like a couple of days. I'm pretty certain you may not want to immediately jump into bed 2 days after that happened. I'm not really sure. It was a bit vague about the amount of time there, but
yeah, it seemed like apparently like it was a while that kind of that he was recovering, stuff like that. He was kind of in and out. So I think that's one thing that like they also like kind of going back to the whole realism thing is that like unlike other versions of Bond where like he kind of springs back to life like kind of right away and everything. This Bond like kind of we see him kind of really getting messed up and kind of at least bleeding and really needing to recover or stuff like that. So.
Well, they took the kind of die-hard Indiana Jones line with him, that you kind of see him getting beaten up more and more and more as the movie goes through, which is always kind of a cool thing to see. It makes it kind of feel more realistic. I
mean, I think the other thing with the Bond as a whole is that it's a modern day fantasy is really what it is, right?
Yeah.
Where there's the black versus white in the sense of the good versus evil. Unlike where like kind of a lot of even like the hero movies, the trend, like kind of with the Dark Knight series and stuff like that, is kind of where they try to make it more the darker thing and kind of blurring, the morality to some degree and stuff like that. Yeah, they, even do that with Craig being kind of more of an assassin than, where like the deal is like kind of, thousands of bullets flies, but nobody really dies and stuff like that. Overall, though, like kind of, Bond as a series, though, is we kind of see him as like kind of some degree even like kind of it's referred to as a male fantasy, something like that. But to me, like it's a modern day fantasy of where in the end you kind of know where you stand with them. You kind of know where like kind of why like everybody else is like kind of whether it's Spectre or Blofeld or like kind of some other iteration. It's evil, right?
Yeah, there's always a very kind of clear kind of good versus bad dynamic, even though they try and sort of weave in some intrigue a little bit. And I mean, of course, this was made when, we're talking post-Lost and J.J. Abrams. So, every movie they felt like, there's got to be at least one twist or two twists, and it kind of just goes wrong. Casino Royale. But in terms of like you were saying, the male fantasy thing, the difference with this one is that the male fantasy is to be like really in good shape and be buff, because there's so many sort of scenes with Daniel Craig, with his shirt off, which is not something you got really in any of the previous Bonds. Like
that's true.
Roger Moore didn't appear topless too many times.
Right.
And even Sean Connery did what I did.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, but it wasn't like Bond rising out.
Right, not to that extent. Yeah.
So that was definitely, and I mean, the one thing I will say that I just wish they wouldn't try to do, especially in the modern Bond movie, they get the technology so wrong. Like in Skyfall, the virus that he puts on there, and they're just like, you plugged the laptop in by mistake. I mean, it was just so dumb, that whole scene. I just was cringing. And this one was again with like luckily they didn't have Q in it, and they didn't have any kind of like apart from message. There was really no technology, which was kind of good in a way. I think it's a bit better when they stay away from that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that is one kind of weird thing that, like, on the one hand, like, kind of that's part of the whole Bond, I don't know, brand, I guess, or the whole Bond, thing is, like, kind of, the technology, right, the toys. It's like, just as much as with Batman, having his utility belt and his kind of, the vehicles and all kind of stuff. Bond's kind of has his cars and his gadgets from Q and like I said, it was interesting how with the reboot and stuff, or with this version of Casino Royale, they just kind of really just dropped all that, and then they kind of came back a little bit with it over the next few and everything. So I guess maybe in a way they were kind of like we're easing back, like kind of into the old ways, I guess, and stuff.
It's like an alcoholic going back to it, just like, no, don't do it. Yeah. I mean, I should say, this is my favorite of all the Daniel Craig movies. I think Quantum of Solace was kind of like, nah. And by the time you get to Skyfall, I just hate that movie with a passion. And Spectre, I didn't even pay attention to it because I knew it was going to be awful. But I mean, I know they got one more coming out next year, maybe.
Yeah. So one thing I think is interesting, and we kind of talked a little bit about the whole Bond girls and everything like that, but M apparently in the actual, novels was a woman, and that's something that I had no idea, I'd never heard before, and I came across this recently, where so in other words, Judi Dench playing M seemed like kind of controversial, revolutionary like that, but according to at least the this is a documentary thing that I came across and everything, but I don't even know where exactly, because I haven't actually seen it kind of written anywhere or something like that, because I've read some of the novels or like that, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah, so that's an interesting idea, and I think what it seems like, at least with this since Casino Royale and the reboot and everything like that, they kind of of course have it's modern times, they're kind of trying to stay relevant and everything by having a female lead and everything, and then even I guess Moneypenny, you're having kind of instead of a Caucasian one, it's now we have a black Moneypenny, and I think that's kind of an interesting twist as well and everything. So maybe I think that's one of the things that they're trying to do is kind of in each iteration, I guess, whether they're intentionally doing something like that. I think one of the things that kind of just is part of Bond is that that they do try to just stay fresh and try to kind of stay more current as they go along.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's kind of, in a way, it's kind of good, but it's kind of also very contrived at the same time. You get this kind of feeling everything is so structured in a Bond movie. There's so much money at stake that everything has to be kind of exactly laid out in a way. And I think it's worth mentioning, of course, that the 1967 Casino Royale is the only movie with a female Bond. We've yet to see even female Bond in the main. There's about 4 of them, or maybe more in the 67 one.
Right. Yeah, that could be interesting. There's somewhere I came along also this other idea that Bond really in the 007 thing is kind of where he's actually multiple agents as it is. That in other words, he as an agent will just basically be a different destination for a person. In other words, somebody will just assume that identity. And I think that's an interesting thing where then they could have a female Bond at some point where the explanation is that this is this is the current agent Bond and stuff like that. But then is she Jane Bond then, or?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that'd be interesting. It'd be gutsy if they tried that.
Right. I mean, they're apparently doing that with the Doctor Who, so.
Yeah, they've done it actually. Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Doctor Who has always been a much more kind of neutral kind of character. I would say you could do it much more easily with him.
So I wonder if kind of the more purists would argue Bond's got to be a man and stuff like that, and to do something like that is kind of ridiculous and catering to the liberals and on and everything. I guess maybe that's an interesting question itself, is so what is kind of at the heart of James Bond and stuff. I mean, certainly we know what he's been in terms of the tradition and where he's been and stuff like that, but going forward in the future, what does that mean, I guess?
I think they should always make Bond a representation of masculinity at that time. So if you read Bond now, he'd have to be a person with an ethical hacker certification and is obsessed with coffee and things like this. And no, I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because, I mean, he was very, the character is very much of his time. It always feels very contrived and everything is a bit sort of, and I said to you before, I would be more interested to see a Mad Men style kind of 60s based reboot,
right?
Setting it in the period, and just a sort of, I think then you could add the realism, and you could, maybe that's too contrived as well. I don't know. It's very hard. It's a very difficult one to know what to do with it, really.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a question that we both have a really hard time answering. Is to is kind of going forward then does Bond really need to really evolve, and then if that's like kind of what that's about and stuff like that, or is he more, to some degree, like kind of, there's a certain way that we remember him of like kind of, from the 60s and from the Cold War era and stuff like that. And then once it starts kind of getting really away from that, then it's really no longer Bond, like kind of, if like, never mind like Moonraker, but then like, they start doing something out in space more and more and stuff like that, then, is it like kind of some totally different character then, right? Like, what was that one Sean Connery movie, Outland, I guess? Like, is it is it like Outland? Then it's not, not Bond. So
Zardoz is definitely not movie. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's like there's so much, you got Sean Connery's performance as someone who's dangerous but also witty. You've got like the music of John Barry. You've got the time period, the fact that the gadgets were kind of new inventions at that time.
Yeah,
they just kind of came together so well. And I mean, for me, it's like anything even post John Barry, I have a hard time with, just because I enjoy his music so much, and like anything after that, it's going to be clearly inferior. I would say that was actually one thing about Casino Royale, which is its saving 67 version, is its saving grace is the Burt Bacharach soundtrack, which is actually really, really good in my opinion, because I'm a big lounge music fan. But yeah, for me, that was.
I think The Look of Love, didn't that win some awards and stuff?
Yeah.
So,
and it's actually in it's not The Look of Love they have in Austin Powers. I think it's another one of Burt Bacharach's tunes, but I think he plays Look of Love in the second Austin Powers movie. I could be wrong.
Right. No, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that you might, if you want to take the time to watch both the 67 and Austin Powers, is there's a lot of scenes that are actually copied from Casino Royale and 67 to Powers.
Okay,
like the spinning on the bed and taking photos and stuff. So
yeah, I have to kind of pay attention to that and see like kind of if I pick up on some of those details, and kind of like touch on that now. But like, so then I think that's part of the whole Bond brand, if you will, is also like kind of having the music right and stuff. And we haven't really talked about that as much, but it's like, even if like you do kind of do like these different more modern singers, like I can see like maybe down the road like Lady Gaga doing a Bond. In fact, maybe she has, I forget what they're, but like they have these different kind of singers doing their version of a Bond song and stuff like that. But meanwhile, though, at the heart of it, like you said, is the John Barry kind of the da-da-da, like I mean, the minute we hear that, it's like kind of okay, we're back with Bond and stuff.
So I am being a bit of a nerd here, but it wasn't actually John Barry who made the main Bond theme tune. He did all of the incidental music and the soundtracks. But the main Bond theme is actually by a different guy. I can't remember his name now, but which is kind of odd. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Chris Cornell, and but I still didn't think his song was very good. It just didn't really do anything for me. I think the one after that, in the Quantum of Solace, was slightly better. I think Adele did the last one, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's hard to top Shirley Bassey and John Barry when it comes to Bond tunes. It's yeah.
I think it's interesting how like so much of our connection with the series is the music and everything. It's like almost as much as kind of going back to like Michael Myers, right? Where the minute we hear the Halloween themes, like kind of like that's what comes to mind and stuff. And and I think in a way it kind of set the pace, I guess, for some of these other kind of characters to kind of have their own theme music and stuff. Like because the minute we hear like the Imperial March is of course Vader, and I think that's the kind of thing that like if you are a iconic enough of a character, then you'll have like kind of your theme music to go with it and stuff.
This follows my theory that in order to make truly iconic movie theme music, you have to have the first name of John, because you either have to John Williams, who does like Superman, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, etc., or John Barry, who does like James Bond and a few others, or John Carpenter, who does like Halloween and very horror. I don't know, but all my favorite kind of movie soundtrack guys. Yeah, I mean John Barry, but I mean he was from what I really thought was interesting about his music is that it's this weird mixture of jazz and classical music. It has all these kind of steering strings, but the structure is actually kind of jazz based, which gives it this really unique feeling. Often kind of imitated, but never quite to the same quality that he sort of brings to it somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how we're just like with him. There's like kind of the signature, you know, like the trumpets, I guess, and stuff, and kind of, you know, the way that kind of goes with everything. And then like you know, another artist I'm really a fan of is Hans Zimmer, where, you know, like kind of different times he has this certain kind of the kind of the way the drums kind of like echo and everything, and then like each kind of develops like there's certain kind of sound that like maybe it's from their roots or from their but then it's to me like it's also like that thing of where if you turned off the music, right, that like it just wouldn't be the same, like kind of you just don't have the same feeling.
Which is why probably ever since the 90s I've not really enjoyed Bond movies to the same extent. So.
Interesting.
And also, I mean, for anybody who's not seen it, who happens to be a fan of the original Bond movies, if you've never watched the Michael Caine spy movies like the Ipcris File and the $1 Billion Brain, can't remember the other one now, but God, I can't remember his name now, the name of the spy, but they're all based on Len Deighton novels, but they also have John Barry soundtracks that are also incredible. Interesting. And they're even more they're actually much more subdued in terms of a spy movie. They're almost kind of much more serious kind of spy movies. But yeah, they're really, really good as well.
Yeah, it seemed like they kind of, for a while, they started kind of going in that direction with, you know, you have like the Jason Bourne, and then like kind of, you know, along that lines, some other, you know, like kind of lesser known ones and stuff. But I don't know. It seemed like where that was like maybe like a little bit of the counterweight to Bond, where for a while that like they kind of wanted to do something that's more, again, like kind of, you know, we talk about realism and stuff like that, and I think that kind of what they were trying to do. But ultimately, it seems like what kind of has stood the test of time, I guess, if you will, is like, you know, we just like having our Bond, and we like having the fun, I guess, that goes with it and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's Harry Palmer movies before I get, you know, I'll be completely upset with myself if I didn't remember the name. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I have no real, I mean, they were kind of cool and gritty, the Bourne Identity movies, but, you know, I have no real desire to rewatch them now at all. Whereas, if you asked me to watch The Spy Who Loved Me, I'd be on that right now. I can quite happily go and watch that immediately.
So true. Alrighty. So what's next on the list do we want to kind of hit for the remakes and versus originals?
Well, it's Christmas time by the time this comes out, I suppose, or getting closer to it. So we're thinking we were going to do it. It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah, that's a classic that I've been wanting to kind of do. You know, not only just kind of to kind of because I actually haven't watched the remake, the more modern ones, stuff like that. So that'll be interesting to kind of to you know, cover that. I think a fun one will be kind of there's so many versions of the Christmas Carol, so I definitely, you know, I kind of, you know, I at least wanted to kind of do Scrooge versus the classics, I guess, one of the classics, and then like I guess we can kind of pick whichever other ones that we want to watch on our own and everything, and kind of. Well, the only other one I really want to see the actual cinema release of Black Christmas and do the comparison with the 60s of that, or the no 70s version. So yeah, that's the only other one on the Christmas list, so to speak.
Alrighty, so I think we'll definitely have to see what Santa brings, and we'll those will be some good ones for the list and stuff. Yeah, I think that's what we got coming up on the work. So as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time for the holiday versions of our remakes versus originals.